Welcome to Bible Study with Fred. I'm in the second part of my comments on 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 to 7. This is Paul's first letter to Timothy. We talked about the positive traits of a pastor should have, and then the negative traits that Paul doesn't think a pastor should have. So let me read 1 Timothy 3, 1 to 7 again. This is a true saying, if a man desire the office of a bishop, he desireth a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behaviour, given to hospitality, apt to teach, not given to wine, no striker, not greedy of filthy lucre, but patient, not a brawler, not covetous, one that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? Not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride, he fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must have a good report of them which are without, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. Now, I talked about how many commentators, talk about how a bishop at that time in the New Testament was what we would consider a pastor today, spiritually ruling over a local congregation. So let's get in that. We talked about the positive traits a pastor should have. Now let's talk about the negative traits Paul does not think a pastor should have. But there are negative characteristics that Paul says should not be part of a pastor. He should not be someone who binge drinks or sits at the cups, imbibing one after another. Verse 8 coming up uses the phrase not given to much wine for deacons. So we can assume by cross-referencing that these phrases mean the same thing. It's ridiculous to assume the pastor can't have a glass, but the deacon can, but just not more than a few. Such distinctions are the result of the fallacy of modernism. Timothy will be told to take a little wine for his stomach's sake later. 1 Timothy 5:23, drink no longer water, but use a little wine for thy stomach's sake and thine often infirmities. There were dozens of types of wines in the first century, many of them not alcoholic, but no more than grape juice or laced with medicine. We now know that unlike what we were told by the experts in the 1980s and beyond that, there is no real safe amount of alcohol to drink that doesn't offer some health dangers. It's generally a good idea to avoid alcohol, but just think of a century or more ago, when water was often disease-causing from shallow wells and the source of much grief. Drinking fermented beverages was much safer. Historians note that our colonial-era forebears drank 3 times as much alcohol per person as we do, with workers demanding their mid-morning cup of whiskey for them to continue. It was nothing to have a barrel of fermented cider by your door for even children to drink from. In England, it was noted that teething babies were given gin wiped on their gums as late as the late 1700s. There was drinking at revivals, casks of whiskey at preachers' conferences, and barn raisings, all before the temperance movement and people like Carrie Nation, look her up, raised the awareness of the damage done by alcohol. A pastor was not to be a striker, certainly not a violent man dangerous to himself and others around him, but this carries a greater idea of also not being a quarrelsome individual. The pastor is not to be the kind of person who's just looking for a fight of any kind. Not greedy of filthy lucre is a point that Paul will make later for us all. Loving money is a sign of wickedness and a failing for any Christian. To be eager for base gain, greedy for money for its own sake, is a poor character trait to possess. Paul will insist later, 1 Timothy 6:10, for the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. The pastor must be a patient man with the admonition against being contentious, both physically and verbally, given again, and then also not wanting what he does not have already, not being a covetous man. The way he administers his own family should be an example. The famous negative idea of the, quote, the preacher's son, of whom songs have been written about, like Dusty Springfield's 1960s hit entitled Son of a Preacher Man, are examples of the sometimes awful offspring of the so-called men of God. Pastor whose family is a wreck would probably not be a good example for the pulpit. If the pastor's family is filled with examples of divorce, illegitimacy, suicide, drug and alcohol addiction, and criminality, it's probably a good bet that daily Bible reading and a good example may have been missing. I'm not saying that such a person can't serve God, just that it should probably not be in the office of the pastor. The pastor shouldn't be someone who just got saved either. New converts can be very zealous and prideful, but it is not likely that they've read the Bible from cover to cover and are steeped in the deeper doctrines of it. They do not have the experience of dealing with Satan's deceptions in other people and themselves and recognizing them as such. They may be enthusiastic, but they are not ready to take on the role of a pastor of a church. It is a dangerous thing to make a charismatic, well-spoken, and excited new convert move too soon to an office in the church like this. There are many things they have to work out about their walk with Christ, and it's very dangerous indeed for them and for the congregation if they be placed in such an important and influential post. Finally, the pastor needs to have a good reputation outside of the church. It's great that a convicted felon who spent time in prison comes to Christ and is fully convinced of his mission and purpose and is completely surrendered to God, but he should not be made a pastor. That position of leadership would expose him in the church to shame and disapproval because of his past. A mature Christian must consider the dirt he's left behind before he covets an office in the church. If a faith-filled member of the church wants to be a pastor and has the skills and the talent for it, and feels led by God to that, it's wonderful. Led by God to it, that's wonderful. However, if he's been divorced several times, had bankruptcies, failed businesses, has children that are running wild, etc., he would do well to forego the pastor's office and do something else for the Lord. Evangelism, teaching, and other things are available to him, but certainly not the pastorship. This should be something he understands without being told. The devil would certainly enjoy the way outsiders would view a church if it was led by a person who had experienced such things in their life, whether they were the cause of them or not. This advice is practical and dismisses the fantasies that some Christians have about being saved, that since they are forgiven by God, everyone else, wrong spouses, the community, the legal establishment, whomever, is required to also forgive you. Well, not exactly. Again, Paul's admonitions are necessary and good. Now, on to his discussion about deacons. So we'll pick it up in verse 8 next time. Now, I don't have these comments published on Amazon, although I do have other commentaries if you'd like to look them over. But you can read anything I've written on blogger.com. Feel free to print it out if you want to hold it in your hand when you're reading it, or you can read it online. But if you watch this video this far, would you please click like and subscribe or follow and share the video with somebody else? But please, again, read your Bible and study your Bible, two different things. Pray to God for wisdom and understanding, and then share your interpretation with someone else. Open the Bible and let God speak to you through his word. And I can repeat that over and over again. That's just the essential thing of what I'm trying to get done here. So anyway, thank you for watching and listening, and have a good day.